Welcome back to the Bourbon Note, everybody. I'm Ben. I got a bottled and bond bourbon banger on the bar. Let's get into it. So on the bar tonight, I've got, bam, this is Bulliet Bourbon, bottled and bond. So interesting fact about this particular bottle from Bulliet is that this is actually their first expression that's their own distillate. They've been sourcing for years. I don't think the source is actually known. Some people say like maybe Four Roses is possibly amongst one of the possible sources. I don't know anything about that, so I'm not going to speculate too much. It is a high rye bourbon, and so I think Bulliet recently seems like they've been maybe trying to make their presence a little more known in the whiskey kind of market, just in the sense that they seem to be coming out with more products now. Like their standard Bulliet bourbon, budget-friendly bourbon. They've also got a budget-friendly rye, and they're fine. But they're available pretty much everywhere, like bars, anywhere you go, chances are they're gonna probably have a Bulliet product on the shelf. And so they have a wide market in that regard, but the last few years it seems like they've been kind of making steps forward to come out with some more, maybe whiskey enthusiast sort of products. They've got the 12-year rye. I think they have a 10-year rye. They came out with the American single malt, and now the bottled and bond, which is their own distillate. So Bulliet's making strides. That being said, I haven't had too many of those. The last one that I had outside of just their regular standard offerings was the Bulliet barrel strength. But I was pleasantly surprised by that. I remember that one having a nice floral note to it that was kind of a surprise. But, fairly reasonably priced. I liked it. Haven't had a single barrel, and I haven't had any of those other ones that they've kind of recently put out that are a little higher tier. So this should be interesting. On the nose, age statement, by the way, 7 years on this, 100 proof, of course, because it is bottled and bond. On the nose, a nice rich caramel, sweet caramel note. There is a little bit of that citrus vibe that I remember getting from the barrel strength that I wasn't expecting. Now this is a different distillate, so I don't know, why those would have anything in common, just other than coincidence, maybe. Or maybe they're doing a similar mash bill to what they were sourcing, or I don't know. But there's a little bit of a citrus note, that's my point. But yeah, kind of just rich standard bourbon notes. And then a nice sort of light citrus vibe on top of it. You get a little bit of the barrel, which is to be expected at 7 years is a decent age. There's also a little bit of the, I don't know what the mash bill is on this, or if it says it. I didn't read it online, so it may say it there. But I am getting sort of a high rye vibe from this. It has a little bit of almost like a root beer barrel candy, which is something I get off of rye whiskeys now and again, or even high rye bourbons. But I'm getting that. But it's not overwhelming. It's not like an overwhelming rye spice. It's kind of like the actual rye note isn't there, but some of the flavors that go along with a high rye bourbon or a rye whiskey seem to be there. Let's see if they're there on the palate. Cheers. Sort of an interesting first sip there. Came across as a little bit lighter than 100 proof would suggest, but sometimes that happens on the first sip. A little bit more of a chocolate note on that first sip, on the palate. Some of those rye sort of notes that I was getting didn't really transfer over onto that first sip, but I got a really nice caramel and chocolate, and it kind of had like a dusty quality to it, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, so far I'm finding this very interesting. I'm gonna get right into the second sip and pick this apart a little bit more. That got much more interesting on the second sip. A little more bold, I was kind of expecting that. But it definitely, that chocolate comes through, and then on the second sip, a little bit of those, a little more leaning in the rye category or high rye bourbon category notes came through. There's a nice little bit of that root beer barrel candy on the palate too, and it makes for a really nice, interesting kind of sweet and not spicy, but with some rye notes to it, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't consider this particularly spicy, but I mean, there is kind of like your standard barrel spice to it that you're gonna have on most bourbons, but it's interesting, there's like the sweet notes, but it's not just down the middle, like it has some standard bourbon notes, but they're all kind of like, they're a little muted on the palate, but they're there kind of to the level that I think works for it. And then there's that kind of chocolate and a little bit of that root beer on top. It's very interesting. I'm liking this one a lot, actually. $50 to $55 on the price point, which, you know, I mean, for a bottled and bond product, I suppose that's not terrible. I actually picked this up for 42, so for 42 bucks, hell yeah.
Shut up and take my money.
And being that this is Bullet's first, you know, product of their own distillate, I'm impressed by this. So let's go in for a third sip before we get out of here. Cheers. I'm loving this, actually. It's really good. I'm not saying that it's like, you know, this, you know, crazy, you know, high tier bourbon that you have to run out and buy, but I'm very impressed with it. It's kind of taking me for a little bit of a ride. It's like all the flavors that I was describing since the beginning are still there, but it's like there's a new layer with every sip that I take. And the notes that are there are interesting in the sense that it's got a little bit of the caramelas and the vanillas and the standard brown sugar, but they're just a little different on this one. And I don't necessarily know how to describe that. It's got a chocolate note, but it's a different kind of chocolate. It's not dark chocolate, not necessarily milk chocolate, but it's like a chocolatey, I don't know, like artificial, not necessarily like Tootsie Roll that I sometimes get, but it's almost like every note that's in here, it's like, okay, I'm picking out that, but it's a little off, but in a good direction. The rye notes are there still. Light root beer is still there. Maybe some baking spices, a tiny little bit of clove. And then some of that citrus that I was getting at the beginning on the nose is kind of there on this last sip, but very, 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 very light. Leaning more into like citrus, like lemon zest or something like that. So this one is pretty interesting in the sense that it's a little bit complex. On the first sip, I didn't really think so, but I enjoy it, especially when like a bourbon just kind of gets more and more interesting as you go through it. Now, I think if I continued to sip on this, we've probably plateaued maybe with what this bourbon is going to do, but I don't know. I think it was kind of a nice surprise that it at least brought a little more to the table than I was expecting for, you know, a $50 whiskey. Not that price is everything. And especially, you know, the first, sometimes when a company's been sourcing for so long, I mean, Bullet's been around for a while, and they're kind of a staple bourbon, at least their standard expressions are, bourbon and rye, I should say. You know, they come out with their own distillate, you never know what you're gonna get. And just going off of memory, I think that they've kind of stayed in their lane. So if you're a fan of Bullet products, like, you know, the higher tier ones like the single barrel or the barrel strength, I think you're gonna like this, but I also think if maybe you're not a fan of the other expressions from Bullet, seeing that this is still their own distillate, it's new, and I feel like it's similar to that, but it's its own thing as well, I think this is worth a shot at the price point. If you're a bourbon enthusiast like I am, you know, a lot of times in these reviews, you know, I've said in the past, like, you know, you can do better for the price, you can do worse for the price, and I think that's an important thing to bring up when trying to review a product, because there are a lot of options out there. But to be honest, if I'm buying these bottles because I want to explore as much whiskey as possible. And so I think this one is worth it. There are some that I definitely think are not worth buying, not worth the price point. But overall, I think I just tend to buy a lot of different expressions. I mean, if I wasn't doing that, then I would just buy my favorite bourbon all the time, and that's all I would keep on the shelf because, you know. So I think if you're a bourbon enthusiast, whiskey enthusiast, and you like exploring different stuff, I would say pick this one up. I don't think that, I have a hard time seeing people like hating this, because I think it plays in the category of kind of down the middle bourbon enough, and it just goes outside of that lane to give it enough uniqueness, but it's not like something, you know, that's way off the rails that I think anybody who likes bourbon is gonna dislike to the point that they won't finish the bottle. Also would make a great cocktail mixer, by the way. 100 proof, if you spend the 50 bucks on it, you don't like it neat so much, I think this would make a good mixer. And so I think it's kind of cool that you can do both of those. You can sip this neat, put it in a cocktail, probably would stand up to a little bit of ice. So yeah, I think this is a good versatile one. Let me know in the comments, guys, if you have tried this one yet and what you think. This has been Bullet Bourbon Bottled in Bond. On the Bourbon Note, I'm Ben. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one.